Hello, everybody. I'm Jason Warner. I'm the CTO of GitHub. And we started a speaker series that we hoped would highlight the future of software. And we wanted to shine a light on people building the future of software and what their views of it might be. And we wanted to learn from those people about things that they care about, things that they're seeing, and things that they're doing. And today, I'm very excited to invite one of those speakers here. And we at GitHub view that we have a very important role to play in the future of software, though we know that others are building on GitHub with us and around us to do that as well. And as more and more businesses and companies face developers directly, we think it's incredibly important that a lot more people in the world understand how to build communities and relationships with developers. So it's with that I'm incredibly excited to have Amir on with us today, and because he's been at the heart of developer platforms and developing communities and interfaces with developers for years. Amir ran DevRel programs globally at Google, which obviously is a mix of both business and technology in the way it's focused on developers and platforms. He then went to Slack before it was obviously a kind of developer platform that people can build upon. And the obviousness is a direct result of the work that he did. He literally wrote the book twice on building conversational bots and about APIs that developers love to use. And then he turned around and did it all again as the VP of Developer Experience at Twitch, which has grown from its gaming roots into a live video platform for all kinds of purposes. And then I'll let him tell you about his new thing, Reshuffle, which is an integration platform for, you guessed it, developers. So I think you'll enjoy this one. And Amir, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
This one, and I will be back later for the Q&A. That'll be awesome.
Awesome. Okay, let's get started. Thank you for having me so much. Okay, it's going to be the obligatory. Do you see my screen? So hi, everyone. My name is Amir Shevat. Very excited to have you all. I'm going to talk about building developer communities and how do you engage developer communities, and about the profession of developer relations. So if you have a startup, a platform, or even an open source project, and you want to engage with developers, I hope this session will be useful for you. A little bit about myself. So today, I'm a one-trick pony. For the last 20 years, I've been only doing developer platforms, engaging with developers, building developer tools. Today, I'm a co-founder and chief product officer of Reshuffle.com. Reshuffle.com is an open source platform that lets you create integrations within your organizations. So if you want to connect your Jira with your Git, with your Salesforce, and create this awesome integration, and you want to run it locally, and you want to use open source, then Reshuffle is probably the right solution for you. I started about 20 years ago in Microsoft. I worked with developers on Windows Workflow. I worked with developers on .NET when Java people still said .NET not yet. It was a great experience. My job was to work with startups to help them work on the Microsoft platform. So I was a developer advocate. Then I joined Google. At Google, I started developer relations for Israel, and then grew and created programs such as the startup program for Google, and also the developer experts, the community of experts that go and speak around the world, the ambassador program for Google. I also created Campus in Israel, which is a physical space where developers could come and could work with Googlers. It was a lot of fun. And at the end of my time at Google, I managed all of Google's scalable developer relations programs, some of which I'm going to talk about today. So Google developer groups, women in technology, my team managed the startup program and the experts program, and also the ISV, people who are building things on top of Google technologies for money. Then I joined Slack. I joined Slack when we were about 90 people. It was 2 months before we launched the platform. We launched our set of APIs and marketplace, and we had 50 developers on our beta, and we had 80 people in the company. And I left 2 years later when we had about 1,500 people in the company, and we had 250,000 weekly active developers on our platform. So that was a crazy experience, and I'll share some of the insights here with you. And if you don't know the correlation, if you're mixing your correlation with your causation, you would say that I pick companies based on the colors of their logo. That is not true, and this breaks the chain here. So then I joined Amazon to be the developer platform for a company they acquired called Twitch. And my job there was to connect between Twitch and game developers. So EA and Blizzard and Riot and Ubisoft and Streamlabs and Stream Elements and all these developers that are building on the Twitch platform. I feel like kind of meta that we're now streaming this on Twitch. It's kind of fun. And because this is not a lot, I also wrote 2 books. One of them is on designing bots, building conversational interfaces. So how can you, as a developer or as a startup, build interfaces such as Slack bots or WhatsApp bots or Twilio bots or any type of software where you can talk to your software or text your software instead of press buttons and stuff like that. Okay, and then another book that I wrote is designing together with 2 engineers from Slack, is designing web APIs. This is all about building APIs that developers love. And we talk about how to design different APIs, but also about how to create an ecosystem around your API. Okay, so let's start with, why do you want a developer community? And I'm going to be controversial here and say there's a very high percentage that you don't really need a developer community. And if you just think that you need a developer community, think again. Many companies think that they need a community at all, but they actually need a different go-to-market or a different type of engagement. Building a community is expensive. Building a community requires people, especially when they're developers, it requires people who are developers. So for example, anyone who works in my team had to be a developer itself, meaning they would be an expensive person because developers are kind of expensive. They're also not contributing core code to your product. And if they do, it's not their main job. So that means that they don't give you the return that developers usually make. So if you don't need a developer relations and if you don't need a developer ecosystem, I strongly recommend not pursuing that. There is, though, a lot of power in the developer community. There are situations where developer community are the make or break of your company or your product. And once you realize that power, it actually becomes a core tenet of your company and a core tenet of your product to have an ecosystem of developers on top of that. And here's 3 examples of developer communities that I ran into. The first one is developer as core contributors. These are people who are actually working for your code. Especially in open source, this is pretty common, but you have an open source project and developers are actually excited and want to contribute code. An example would be Linux. Here, the challenge with this developer community is all about governance. How do you define the processes of building the code? How do you create a good PR? How do you decide whether PR comes in or not? Who gets to reject features? I'm not going to talk about that, but if you want, please reach out to me and I'll be happy to create a presentation about managing open source project governance of community. I'm going to focus on the 2 second types of communities. Developers are as customers. So you have a product, and your developers are actually your customers. They're using the product. They might be even paying for the product. A good example would be Stripe or Twilio, where you actually, as a Twilio, as a developer using Twilio, it's really easy for me to understand that I'm the customer and I'm actually paying for API calls. And another type of developer that we're going to cover is partner ecosystem. That means that I have a product and developers come and build on my platform in order to make my platform better. In order for them, it's in order to be successful on my platform. And for me, it's in order to make my platform better. So when I worked at Android, Android would not be very useful if we didn't have a developer community. If we didn't have Uber and Spotify and all the awesome and games, of course, and all the awesome. I play Hearthstone every day, and that is the core of my phone because I love playing. So you have something like a platform, like Android or iOS, and you want developers to build on top of that platform and make that platform much more valuable. Then you need to build an ecosystem around your product. At Slack, we had a very similar thing. We were integrating into a lot of. We actually started without a developer relations. We built our first 64 integrations ourselves, and then we found out that it's really hard, and customers were asking for so many other integrations into so many other tools. So we decided to actually open a platform as a result of not being able to do it ourselves. And then we created this platform, and we created this amazing value for our customers by integrating into all the tools and services that they had. And today, the top, when I left, the top three, and I'm sure it's still today, the one of the top three reasons for people loving the product is that it integrates into one of their tools. So it could bring a lot of value for your platform. Okay, so we talked about why should you do developer relations or developer community. Let's talk a little bit about the how. How would you go about and create a developer ecosystem? So this is basically my framework for thinking about engaging with developers. You need to inspire them. Inspire them is teaching them why. Why should they care about your other platform or SDK or open source project? Why is it important for them? That's what I call the within. What's in it for me? Then you do that, and about how to do that, you do that by doing outreach and doing a lot of inspirational content. Then you need to educate them about the how. How should they build, and what should they build? What are the things that you want them to build? A lot of a common mistake that I see with platforms is that they're not opinionated. They say, hey, here's an API, do whatever you want with it. And I think that initially is a mistake, because you need to show people examples of what is a good use case of the platform and API. Then you need to enable them. You need to give them tools and services to be successful. Examples for that would be give them an SDK, give them a debugger, give them something that captures logs, give them an ability to program in their own language. These are all capabilities that enable developers, once they are inspired and educated, to actually develop on your platform or use your SDK. Then there's the most important part in this model, which is often not taken into account, which is feedback. I think this is the most important part of developer outreach. Developers are awesome because they tell you when your product is broken. They're opinionated and they're positive, from my experience. They tell you what you need to build in order to make them successful. Capturing that feedback and feeding it back to your product is the most important thing that you could do, because that is a collaborative experience that you could do with your community. I'm a strong believer that community building and leadership starts with participation. If you don't belong to the community, you can't lead the community. And a feedback loop helps you capture that goodness that the community is telling you if your product or service or API is working for them or not, and feeding it back to the product team. And we can talk more about it later. This is another way to look at the developer outreach, which is through a funnel. For those of you who don't know what a funnel is, it's a common term in marketing where you, let's say you land on Amazon and then you choose a shoe, and then you choose a blue shoe and a running shoe, and then you choose your size, and then you click and put your credit card in, and then you buy. With each step of this this process, less and less people go through. So let's say 10,000 go to Amazon every second, and only 3 buy every second. So it looks like a funnel from a process perspective. Another way of looking at developer ecosystems is through a developer funnel. So how many developers are interested in your product? How many of them are actually building on your API? How many of them have published on your marketplace? So one of the metrics that measured ourselves in Slack is how many published apps do we have? From these apps, how many are actually being used? A lot of people publish things, but nobody uses them. I've had experiences like that, both in Twitch and in Slack and in Android. And so measuring the usage and usefulness of the things that people buy and build on your platform is important. And last but not least, are people making money? That's an interesting mechanism because it moves people from I'm a hobbyist using your product or platform to this is my business, this is my core thing. And one of the things that Stuart Butterfield, the CEO of Slack, told me when I joined, which blew my mind, was I want the next Slack to be built on Slack, which is he wanted someone to build a business that is as successful as Slack on top of the Slack platform. So now that, and by the way, this funnel could be different for different ecosystems. So your funnel might not finish in monetization. It could finish in usage, or it could finish in something completely different. Your funnel could look, the steps of the funnel could look different, but usually you would have the same type of funnel for your developers. And now you need to do 2 things. On the one side, you need to write the metric that measures that step of the funnel. So for interested, for example, for Reshuffle, is how many people land on dev.reshuffle.com. That for me is the metric for interested. Building is people using the Git repository for reshuffle.com. Publishing, we don't have that metric, but we have like people who engage with us and ask for a demo. Then usage, and then monetization. So you need to write a metric that is associated with each step of the funnel so you can actually measure it. And on the other side of the funnel, you need to write the activities that you think will move the needle. What are the things that you could do in order to get people to be interested in the product? Speaking in events is one. Writing articles is another. Doing an ad campaign, it could be another one. So what are the actions that you can take in order to move developers through that funnel? And now you need to actually take those actions and measure the impact on the step. So I run a Google campaign or a Facebook campaign, and I get people to land on my landing page. How effective is this? Is this actually moving the needle? Are people converting into building? Am I capturing the right users? So that's another way of looking at the developer funnel. And I would say mix and match those in order to see that you're actually doing the right thing. Now, let's talk a little bit about developer relations as an organization. How do you build a developer relations team? So these are more or less the big parts of developer relations organizations. There's an advocacy team. They do the one-to-many. They do activities that have broad reach. They speak in events. They run communities. They are ambassadors of third-party communities, and I'll talk about that later. Their job is to inspire and educate developers at large. They do all the activities that are scalable. Similar to that, you have the content writers. Content writers usually do not go and speak in events, but they write the tutorials, the one-on-ones. They write the dev site. So if you have a developer landing page and you have tutorials there, and you have JavaDoc, for example, they would create those documentations and write content that inspire, but mostly educate and enable developers to use your platform. So that is breadth engagement on the one hand side. On the other hand side, you have the depth engagement. This is the one-to-few or one-to-one. For example, partner engineering. Sometimes in Amazon, it was called solution engineer. These are people who go, solution architect, actually. These are people who go and work with top partners on creating amazing engagements. So for example, I think someone in this channel, in this stream, is called John Agan. I had the pleasure of working with him, and he managed the partnership engineering at Slack. And his job was to work with companies like Google, like Salesforce, like small startups that showed a lot of potential, and create amazing integrations between those companies and Slack. So their job was to work with selected set of partners in order to create what we called lighthouse wins. How can you create wins that inspire developers to work with us and bring a lot of value to our customers? Last organization that I've seen is enterprise architects. These are people who work with customers, big customers, that use your platform and help them integrate into that platform. You can look at them as kind of a success engineers for developers. Their job is to make customers who have already bought the product be very successful on the platform. They're very valuable. So for example, at Slack, we had, when IBM bought Slack, we had this team work with them in order to integrate and create usage of our platform inside IBM. Okay, so we talked about how to do a developer relations and what is the structure of a good developer relations organization. I want to deep dive into communities, because that's a very common activity that you do inside developer relations. And I want to take you through 3 examples of building communities and how we created communities in different places in Microsoft, at Google, and at Slack. And then we can explore what are the differences between those type of activities, because building communities is not the same in everywhere you go. So the first use case is when I was working at Microsoft. This was about 15 years ago. And we had something called the Microsoft roundtables, or it was also called the CTO roundtable in many other places. This was a community engagement that was high touch, meaning that we actually curated the people that came to the community. We selected them. You had to pay to be a part of the community. It was FTE, like full-time employee, managed the community. They created the content. They gathered the people. The events were in Microsoft offices. And it was very ROI driven. What we did is we collected the CTOs and CIOs of the companies who had enterprise agreements, who were paying more than $100,000 to Microsoft. We collected them together and created a community out of them. And we gave them a lot of high quality content in order to work with us. And what we saw is that working between themselves helped us a lot with convincing them of the value that Microsoft brought to their business, because they talked to each other and they talked about what was successful and what was not successful. And that provided a lot of value. So it was high touch. We ran this all over Europe and the US and major places in Asia. It was very, very successful because it was very focused on high quality, high touch, and scalable. It was pretty expensive because we paid for everything. We paid for the location, we paid for the content, we paid for everything. But it was tied into ROI. You couldn't get into that community if you didn't pay us. So we saw a direct correlation between causation between joining the community and being a paying customer. So that was a high touch, high quality, scalable, and expensive. But when it was tied into monetization, it was the ROI, the return on investment was pretty high. Then there was the Google Developer Group. When I joined, it was already very successful, and I hope I helped making it slightly better. It was a great success, and it still is a great success. There are more than 750 Google Developer Groups that prior to Corona met in person. Now I guess they're meeting online every month. So every month, people volunteered. By the way, this is volunteer-led. People met each other for free to talk about the Google technologies. So now think about your API or company. Think about 750 meetups from around the world that meet on a monthly basis to talk about your API or platform. Isn't that mind-blowing? And it was led by volunteers who were doing that for free. And we had places like Madagascar, and even people were fighting over who's going to be the Google developer lead for certain hot places. So it was super active. These people were amazing. Every time we released a new API or a new version of Android, they would go and get content and create content and get speakers to speak about this new and exciting APIs or platform. So it was a great experience, highly scalable, not very expensive. So we had about 5 people managing all of the engagement around the world. We still sent swag, and it was still expensive in terms of like a startup, but in terms of the previous engagement that I talked to in Microsoft, this was peanuts. And it was highly scalable, and we were very happy with it. We didn't tie it to monetization because Android is free. We tied it more towards awareness and proficiency. But it didn't come without problems. We had a problem, one of our biggest communities, I think it was in Brazil. And I went to visit there, and I came in and there were a lot of people. And I started talking to them to see, hey, what are you developing? Are you developing an Android or a Chrome? And a lot of them were saying, no, I'm not a developer. I'm just here because I love Google. And there's good food in the meetups and smart people. And this problem is what I call cookie eaters. Sometimes if you have a community, you had people that are not actually the core audience that you want in that community. You have a developer community, and sometimes people come just for the brand, or just for the cookies, or just for there's an event and they're bored. And if you have too many of those, it dilutes your community. So because developers, when they come to a meetup, their expectation is to work with other developers. And if they meet a lot of other people who are not developers, for example, they're all in marketing, they don't really want to be in that meetup anymore. And that creates satisfaction problems. And also content becomes pretty watered down because people don't want to talk about hardcore things. So what we actually had to do is take a surgical approach there and create a lot of good content. Work with the community leader there in order to create very strong content and focus on making sure that only developers and high value developers belong to that group. So my learnings there is that you can do you need to measure the quality, but you can do high touch and scalable way of doing community. It's much less expensive. it requires a lot of coordination and love and fostering of this highly scalable community. And you need to make sure that you always foster it, making sure that there's not too many cookie eaters, make sure that your community leaders have a succession plan. Sometimes community leaders get tired and don't want to manage your community anymore. So making sure that you have a junior community leader who's willing to take the throne once the major community leader wants to leave is another best practice there. And the impact that you want to measure with scale is awareness. These communities created a lot of awareness for the Google products. The last case I want to talk about is the Slack community strategy, which is kind of interesting because what we did there is we didn't have a budget for community. We had amazing partner engineers, and we had amazing content creators, and we had great advocates, and we just didn't have the budget for a community. My budget initially first year, I think, was about $5,000 for everything. And community is an expensive thing. So we decided to, instead of building our own community, we decided to hack into other communities. So what we did is we went into customers, like people who were working with Slack, like IBM, and said, hey, IBM, do you want to promote Watson, which is your AI? We want to promote the Slack API. Why don't we build a workshop that says, build a Slack bot with Watson? And they said, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And then let's go and talk about it to our community, to the IBM developer community. And then we did the same thing with Google and with Amazon. We said, like, and these are all third-party images of them engaging with the community on top of the Slack platform. So we went to Amazon and we said, hey, you want to promote Lambda. We want to promote Slack integrations. Let's talk about using Lambda to build Slack integrations. And they said, yeah, that's a great idea. We just read about you in TechCrunch. You're a small, sexy startup. Let's do that. And all of them were very happy to give us access to their community because, first of all, we found what's in it for them and a good value proposition for the partner. We also were like the sexy new kid in town, and it was very obvious for them that that will generate more love for their platform. So always build a win-win-win situation, but you don't need to create your own community. You can really easily engage with third-party communities that are interested in your product without seeding and creating your own community. And a community is something that could evolve later on. Right now, Slack has a thriving developer community that I'm very proud of, and the team has done an amazing job. But in the first year, we just didn't have the money to do that. So we had to hack into other developer communities. So the learnings there is that you can do high quality, high touch, and scalable content, but it needs to be, but you need to have a buy-in into the platform. You either need to be sexy or very valuable, or the new shiny thing. Usually, building value is more important than the other things. And if you talk to a community leader and you bring value to their community, they will give you an into their community, because that's all what we're trying to do, is to provide value to our communities. And use partners, choose wisely, make sure that you choose the right partner. And the impact that we saw is pure integrations. People were using Lambda to build Slack bots. Our partners measure that as well. People were using Watson to build building Slack bots. Again, integration, measured, and impact. Which brings me to the last topic. I'm going to spend like 2 minutes talking about measuring things and measuring the right things, because one of the key problems with developer relations is that you can do a lot of activities without actually moving the needle or moving the wrong needle. Let's look at 3 bad examples and 2 examples that I think make more sense. So the first one is on the bottom end is developers engaged, sometimes called developers touched. So how many developers, how many eyeballs did you capture? How many people did you touch? Basically, I know COVID, you don't touch people, especially not random people. This was a measurement that we used at Google and also at Microsoft. So how many people did I talk to? I think this is not a very good type of metric, because first of all, you can have a bad impression on the person that you touch. You can talk about a product and do a very bad job, very poor job, and nobody wants to use the product. You actually talked to 10,000 people, but nobody cared. Another thing is that it's not a directly valuable thing for the company. Even if developers are engaged, they might not take an action that is important to the company. Then there's developer registered. I don't like developer register because I think that you can move people to register just by doing good hacking of like Facebook and Google and a good landing page. You would get people to register, but that's the last activity that they will do. Especially if you're great in marketing and UI, you can get people to do the registration, but actually usage is much harder. The last one that I don't really like is revenue to the company. I think it's indirect. It's also screws up incentives. And I'll give you an example. I was working at Microsoft as a developer advocate. And then there was a debate about whether developer advocates should have quotas. And I was really against that because I felt that that will turn me into a salesperson. The minute I have a quota, I would stop thinking about what's good for the developer and what's good for the ecosystem or my community. And I would start thinking about how can I get people to pay? And that's a very different way of thinking than developer relations. Developer relations need to be advocates. They need to be bi-directional tool that helps the company engage with developers and help developers engage with the company. Definitely not sales, in my opinion. Now, the top two are kind of important. The first one is number of developers with weekly active tokens. That means that a developer has built something on the Slack platform, has that token is now being used on a weekly basis. So that means that they actually went through the funnel of being inspired, educated, hopefully gave feedback. They're definitely enabled because they're using a token, they're using the API, and that API is used on a weekly basis. That means that they built the entire value flow for the customers. The second last one is how many people. What's the correlation? This was just like in Slack, we saw very strong correlation. So about 97% of our paying customers were using the platform. And we talked about that at the time, even publicly. And that was very important to us because we wanted to make sure that our customers, our paying customers, are still using the platform on an ongoing basis. So we're continuing to give them value. Okay, lessons learned. Work on both breadth and depth, like I showed you. Focus on high-value developers and partners. Measure and align the right thing. Advocate, so be bi-directional rather than be an evangelist, rather than like saying, hey, praise the Lord, here's our API. Say, here's our API. If it's broken, we're going to work with you to make it better. We can talk a little bit later about like where in the org, but like if you're part of engineering or product, that's amazing. Make sure that the money to your organization comes specifically for developer engagement, rather than like sales, for example. And always, always, always think about what's in it for me, for the developer. Why should they use the platform? What is the value of the platform? Okay, last thing, which is super meta, is if you want to experiment with developer outreach, I highly recommend doing streaming, which is basically what we're doing now, which is super meta. One of my friends, Romain from Stripe, did a set of very successful Stripe sessions engaging with developers on Twitch. Visual Studio does the same. They have a channel that is pretty popular, teaching developers how to use Visual Studio. So think about new ways of streaming, new ways of engaging with the community. Because right now it's kind of hard to meet in person. but there's tons of opportunities to engage online and do scalable engagements with your developers. Thank you. You are awesome. Okay.
All right, Amir, that was awesome. Thank you so much for all of that. Now we should get to the Q&A portion of this.
Thank you. It took a little bit more. I was like talking and stuff like that, and I noticed that the time went through a little bit longer than I expected. But
no, I think everyone enjoyed the information. One thing we should say too is in the Q&A, if we don't hit something now, and if you're watching this later, please still drop questions in there. We will be looking at the discussion thread throughout time. And if you have something, that's a very easy way to get in touch with Amir or myself or anybody else, and we could always go back and forth on there. So it's kind of the beauty of async communication tools like GitHub for this. So Amir, thank you so much. You obviously have a ton of experience you share, and I love the stories too, particularly the cookie eater one. Those are always fun to talk about. So
it's true.
But let's get into a couple of questions here real quickly about some of the things that you've experienced and seen over the years. So let's talk about a time or a place where DevRel just doesn't work.
Yes. So I think the developer ecosystem is a result of a product market fit rather than the cause for a product market fit. So you need to have a product developers love and then build the community and ecosystem. If you're saying, hey, I'm going to build an ecosystem, but my product is not that useful, then I think you don't get a lot of value, and you hit the wall really, really fast. You try to engage with developers, they're friendly because they're friendly beings, but then they walk away because they don't care or you're not giving them a lot of value. So a big mistake that I see a lot of startups is trying to build a community before they reach the product market fit. Actually, developer relations is a way to get all the people that love your product to build value and give them a lot of value. And that's a common mistake that I see.
That's awesome. I think I want to come back to that one in a little bit too, because there's some nuance inside that one. So though, let's keep going forward. What are some of the anti-patterns that you see outside of maybe bringing DevRel too early when they don't have product market fit?
Anti-patterns. Turning DevRel into sales. If your DevRel are trying to, so here's the thing with developers, and I'm a developer, so I can say that. If we would really love talking to other developers, we are okay talking to developer relations people. We kind of shy away from marketing people, and we run away screaming when there's a salesperson in the room. And that is common. I've talked to many developers and I got that. If your developer relations is a salesperson, then they won't have a lot of success. A second anti-pattern, which is very common, is not having developer empathy. One thing that I did when I interviewed people for my organization is I asked them, where is the platform broken? Use the platform and tell me where it's broken. And if they told me, hey, everything is amazing, everything is okay, that was actually a negative signal for me. Because I don't believe that there's a platform that doesn't have places to grow. And in order to be a developer relations person, in order to be a part of the community, you need to realize that we live in a work in progress kind of life. As developers, we love to check each other's PRs. We love to give feedback to code. This is part of our being. If we say, hey, everything is great with something, then we probably don't have a lot of developer empathy. So make sure that you have people in your organization that know all the bad points, all the friction points, and have enough developer empathy and understand what's good for and what motivates your developers. So not having developer empathy and selling crap. That's
one of the anti-patterns that I see all the time is that selling one. It's I don't know where it comes from. Obviously, it can come from a variety of different places. But if you're going to sell to me, the CIO or the CTO of an organization, that's one thing. But don't sell to the developers. And interestingly, in a 2020 world, the easiest way to sell to me is to not sell to my developers, but have them still use and love your product, because then I will automatically write a check. And
Exactly.
But don't sell to them. Steak dinners and things like that don't work here. You got to find a different approach.
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay, this is going to be a combo question, going back to the first one. So what about a startup that's got one DevRel person? How do you want to focus that person? How do you want to start out? But then go back to the first question, which is pre-product market fit. Because what if you're a startup that wants that developer community, or thinks the developer community is actually critical to long-term? How do you thread the needle? When might you know you need that first DevRel person with maybe pre-product market fit or just close to it? Like, how do you think about the whole thing there?
Yeah. So I think at the beginning, and that's a critical stage that my startup is right now, is figuring out product market fit in terms of like getting a lot of feedback. So there's two roles for that first developer advocate. The first thing that they need to do is build the table stakes things, all the basic things that you need as a developer in order to land, understand, and be successful on the platform. And the way to measure it is called 5 minutes to hello world. And you should probably read about that. It's a great metaphor in thinking about, like, I land on a landing page for an API. How fast can I, from landing on that landing page, actually use that API or platform successfully? How fast can I write an hello world on Android, for example? How fast can I use a GitHub API and be successful with it? So if the time is 5 minutes, that's amazing. If the time is 5 days, that's horrible, and no developers will probably spend any time. If it's somewhere in the middle, it's something that you should probably try to make better as time passes. So the job of the first person is to build the table stakes for the developer to be able to land on a certain destination, understand the value proposition, and then go through a set of steps, hopefully short set of steps, in order to be successful. So that is the one job of that developer person. The second one is capturing feedback. So what we did at Slack, for example, is every Thursday, we bought pizzas. I used my $5,000 budget for that. We bought pizzas, and we got developers to come and speak about their experience on the Slack platform. So that creates a lot of empathy and understanding within the product group about how and what is missing in the platform. And we did a lot of user research. We interviewed developers. We brought developers to speak with the PMs. So that's the two things. Make sure that as you continue, you get developers to try. I actually offer $25 of Amazon credit initially for people to play with my product, play with my API, and just give me feedback. Do this use case on my platform and give me feedback at what works and what didn't work. So capturing that value is gold, because again, as I said, one thing that I love about developers is that they're opinionated and they're direct. So they will tell you what's broken and they will tell you how to fix it.
I love the point about empathy through and through. I talk about this quite a bit publicly, which is obviously developer empathy and having an understanding for that. And I talk about pre-obvious and post-obvious startups. You know, there's a pre-obvious phase to you and a post-obvious phase to you. But more than that, when it comes to the developer empathy side of this, is the 0 to 1, 1 to 2 moment. And I think we as a world still get this wrong with developers. We don't have the best tools for developers. And I like to begrudgingly joke about this, because I can still feel like, even if I'm at GitHub and Microsoft, I'm punching up to Amazon or your old employer Google, but there's not a lot of developer empathy, it feels like, in the developer tools approach at some of those larger companies. They don't actually know what goes in on a day in, day out basis for someone consuming all of the Amazon services in aggregate and what happens there. So I think that's an excellent point. Thank you for reinforcing that one.
Totally agree. And by the way, we all suffer from that. When I was at Google, we had like a landing page for developers, and we actually had developers come and go through the flow, and we watched them in a lab, and it was shocking, the experience. Like, what we thought was trivial was not trivial. So even if you're an enterprise and you think that you have a great developer platform experience, always bring developers and grow your empathy as time passes.
Awesome. We have a couple of questions around a topic around live streaming, and I'm not sure exactly the intent behind this, but we have one in the discussions group and one in the chat. So for folks who are writing yours in the chat, feel free to go drop it in the discussions for more, so we can have an active live conversation after the stream as well. But I'm going to read the question. I think you can read it too, Amir, here in the comments, but there's quite a bit around stream of execution. What if you're trying to learn from content creator streamers? Do you see as a compelling developer relations content specific to the live stream format? That's interesting. There's a lot of content creators out there. There's a lot of content creation platforms. You've got all the content creators out there. We had a couple of announcements last couple of days about even startups that are going into the community engagement side of the fence. Do you see a difference, similarities, or how might you think about that?
So I think that live streaming taps into the hero theme. Twilio did this very well in the early days. They had like the PHP, I think they call it ambassadors, but they had developer advocates who were amazing in specific verticals. They were amazing in Python. They were amazing in PHP. They were amazing in Java. They were amazing in microservices. And these were like the heroes of that third-party community. So a live stream is all about a certain person sitting and being the hero and helping a community. So it's a broadcast. It's a one to a lot. And what we've seen in Twitch is, regardless of like whether it's developer relations or not developer relations, the people who cared most about their community were the most successful. So if you turn your developer advocates into heroes, into people who do live streaming on an ongoing basis and foster and care about their community, live streaming is a great way of engaging because it creates a few things. It creates immediacy. So you can actually ask questions. So I'm playing with Visual Studio or something like that. And then somebody say, hey, you used a shortcut. What did you use? And I say, hey, it's control for something, right? F. And there's an immediacy. There's also like a moment in time. And I remember that with my kid, with Ninja. The first time my kid contributed to Ninja, like send them a bit. And Ninja said, hey, thank you, Johnny. And my kid was like, boom. He said, Johnny, I'm a hero now. So like finding people in your community and making them the hero for the moment is a great way. So like having guests in your stream is another great way to engage with your community. So what I think my general perspective on this is look at the medium, look at who's very successful on this medium, and then of live streaming. Look how they engage, how they interact with their community, and then extrapolate that on developer outreach. And I think it's the same thing. Developers are like people, are people, and people like to engage in community activities. And streaming is the next big developer outreach, I think.
That's fascinating, because if you actually extract what's happening in a lot of other creator content vertical markets to the developer specific function, if you look at TikTok or Instagram, or the Substack type of things that are happening, that is exactly what you described there. That's going on in those different areas. Just applied to the developer. I mean, now
I love that. You gave me an idea of like trying TikTok. That's a great idea. 60 seconds on a certain API. That would be amazing.
But it's like, you kind of like blew my mind here for a second, because we're all people at the end of the day. We're all people, and how we engage with each other, particularly obviously in COVID, but in a general world too. You know, we can learn from the different verticals, like what is happening with all the podcasts at the moment. And effectively what Spotify is trying to do is create heroes out of certain celebrity personas that they go out and engage with the community that way. That's fascinating. Okay. Now you gave me homework to go make sure that I fully understand what's happening over here, and then I can bring it back to the developer world too. So thank you. That's awesome. Amir, I cannot thank you enough for coming on and spending an hour or so with us here today. This has been wonderful. So just sincerely, thank you so much. I think
thank you.
I learned more than I expected to, and that's always fun and amazing. Awesome perspective.
Thank you for having me. I'm always excited to do this anytime.
Awesome. And don't forget, everyone, the questions in the discussions group that we'll drop the link to again here. Keep them coming. We'll go back and answer them.